What up, nerds? It me, your boy Loki, the #1 most famous VTuber in the world. Pokemon. Pokemon, Pokemon, Pokemon. Pokemon? Pokemon. Did that feel repetitive? Fitting, because that's exactly what main series Pokemon releases have been like for, oh, I don't know, forever? It's been a long time since we've gotten something new and fresh from Pokemon. The jump from 2D to fully rendered 3D models and environments did little to shake up the formula, and that's putting it nicely. I can't help but wonder, for a developer like Game Freak, backed by the financial powerhouse that is Nintendo, why is that? Why has every Pokemon game we've gotten since Gen 1 been more or less exactly the same? True, we have spin-off games like Mystery Dungeon, Pokemon Ranger, Pokemon Tournament, Pokemon Snap, and... that. But all those games have very niche audiences. They lack the mass appeal that the core series has with its tried-and-true creature-collecting mechanics. In the main series, though, Game Freak has been either too scared, unwilling, or unable to innovate beyond what we've already seen again and again and again. To shake things up, we've gotten new battle mechanics in the form of gimmicks. Though Mega Evolution eventually grew on me and Z-moves were kind of cute, Gigantamaxing was, for me, where they really started to push it, and now we have Terastalizing, or however the heck you say that, which I very much do not care for. Pokemon is one pendulum card away from alienating its entire original fanbase. The saving grace is that when these gimmicks suck, they go away. We don't have to deal with them in the next game. But then, when something fun comes along, like Mega Evolution, we never see it again. So far, anyway. Which is really confusing decision-making, to say the least. So, Pokemon hasn't exactly been innovative since its inception. And it hasn't needed to be because, until now, it's had no real competitor to push it to be. The closest contender so far has been Digimon, but even that doesn't come close to matching Pokemon in popularity or sales. Beyond Digimon and other similar concepts, we have straight-up clones of Pokemon, such as Nexomon, but for a while it seemed like those could never reach the same heights as their forebear. Until Palworld, that is. It's been out for about a month now, and it's still one of the best-selling and most-played games on Steam, and that's not likely to change very soon. And why is that? It's because it's a game very similar to Pokemon that includes features that Pokemon players have been wanting for years. In order to see the appeal that Palworld has over Pokemon and understand why it might pose a threat to Pokemon's long reign at the top of this genre, let's first look at Pokemon, at what it has and what it refuses to change. The closest the main games have come to shaking things up in a meaningful way was Pokemon Legends Arceus. But while at first glance it may look significantly different from the other main games, those differences are deceptively slight and make up a thin coat of paint that, when peeled away, reveal Arceus to be pretty much the same exact thing you're used to. And that's a shame, because the premise this game was marketed on sounded really interesting. The idea was that Pokemon Legends Arceus took place in an era before people and Pokemon were living together the way they do in the modern world. To me, it seemed that the ad campaign was implying that there was little to no positive interaction with Pokemon outside the player character. And it got me thinking that the player character was going to be among the very first Pokemon trainers, and would start to help people see Pokemon as more than just monsters. Well, that's partially true. The regular citizens of Jubilife Village are pretty scared of Pokemon, due in no small part, I'm sure, to Kamado babbling non-stop about how dangerous and terrifying they are. But Galaxy Team's Survey Corps, including Kamado himself, all catch and train Pokemon. Seriously, every single scout and every town guard is using these terrifying monsters as partners in whatever their endeavors may be. So, right off the Zubat, the notion that catching and training and even living alongside Pokemon in this more ancient world is anything new is a straight-up lie, and the further outside Jubilife Village you go, the thinner the lie gets. In the Hisui region, there are two clans, the Diamond and Pearl clans, who not only keep Pokemon around, but seem to love and revere them even more than some people in the modern games do. The game even has a Team Rocket-esque bad guy team in the form of the Misfortunes who, as if I even need to point this out, also train Pokemon to battle against you. Legends Arceus' dialogue creates a shallow impression that you are indeed living in a world vastly different from the Pokemon world you're used to, where people and Pokemon have yet to create a lasting bond. But beneath the surface of what's implied, the reality is that Hisui is hardly any different from modern Sinnoh in that regard. As the player character, you're still catching Pokemon like you always have. You're still battling other trainers, even if some of them don't follow the rules and send all their Pokemon out against you at once. Bastards. And you're still traveling the world space with the goal of defeating a series of bosses before finally challenging a number of legendary Pokemon in the end. The only real change to that formula is that you're fighting these big noble Pokemon whose battles are intermittently interrupted by Soul-style dodge spamming segments instead of gym leaders. There's only one really new mechanic in Arceus as compared to the other games, and that's that Pokemon can attack you in the overworld whether you have a Pokemon out or not. But while mechanically this is new, lore-wise this isn't any different at all from the way things are back in the modern world. Right from the very first game, Professor Oak warns you that if you go into the tall grass without Pokemon of your own to protect you, you'll be attacked. This has been the case in every main game since. The only difference here is that the main games physically prevent you from making this stupid decision, while Arceus says, sure, go ahead, knock yourself out, literally for all I care. And really, what does this new mechanic add to the experience? Sure, you can continue to throw Pokeballs if your party is defeated, as if you're playing a console port of Pokemon Go, but this is hardly a game changer in any significant way. So, if pretty much everything in Pokemon Legends Arceus is the same way things have been since Pokemon's beginning, what's changed? What has Game Freak done to shake up the formula and give us something new and interesting?
Nothing!
Exactly! Living in a more open, primal version of the Pokemon world in which people and Pokemon were only just starting to interact was such a cool idea. But committing to it fully would have meant changing the core mechanics of the game. Not just how we move around and how we battle, but every aspect of how we interact with this world. At some point, Nintendo and/or Game Freak must have realized this and decided it was too big a risk, and therefore chose to stick to the tried-and-true formula while making the premise a surface-level gimmick rather than building an interesting new experience around it. And what a disappointment that is. I feel like they were right on the cusp of bringing us something awesome, but in the end, Pokemon Legends Arceus was the same stuff, different era. I feel like many fans, myself included, have been hoping and wishing and pleading with Game Freak, to give us something new for a long time now. Their response to that has been battle gimmicks, but that's not at all what I've been yearning for. The biggest thing Pokemon lacks for me is interactability. Yes, it has things like Pokémon Ami, camping, etc., where you can play with your Pokemon and pet them or feed them. And while that's definitely a step in the right direction, it feels very bare bones and like an afterthought. What I really want is to be able to do more with my Pokemon, interact with them in a more meaningful way, and be able to see them interact with the world in ways besides battle. I mean, for a game series that constantly insists that Pokemon are not just tools for battle, isn't it a little weird that there is borderline nothing to do in these games with your Pokemon besides make them battle? Once upon a time we had Pokemon contests, but we haven't seen those since Gen 4, and even then they were essentially just beauty pageants from Pokemon. I'm sure I don't need to explain that that doesn't exactly have universal appeal, although I always participated in them just because I wanted something, anything to do with my Pokemon besides battling. In between battles, of course. I'm not at all implying that Pokemon shouldn't have battling. Blasphemy! I'm kind of rambling now, but my point is Pokemon has always lacked, and perhaps always will lack, meaningful ways to interact with your Pokemon outside making them battle each other, and personally I just want more. And that is where Palworld comes in. Often dubbed Pokemon with guns, Palworld is so much more than that. It has all kinds of ways to interact with your pals. You can pet them, feed them, pick them up, ride them, and even put them to work. All of that in addition to, as you'd expect, being able to make them battle other pals. And Pokemon really just doesn't have any of that. True, like I said, you can pet and feed your Pokemon in a little side mode in later Pokemon games, but it's just not the same as being able to call them over to you in the overworld and pet them after they've won a battle. Moreover, while Pokemon can be fed in later games, your pals need to be fed, and I don't know, I just like that. I like needing to take care of them. Also, while Pokemon does allow you to ride Pokemon, it's normally very circumstantial and it's not your Pokemon, and no, that does not count. In Palworld, though, you can ride your pals. Granted, only certain pals can be ridden, but that's perfectly reasonable. There are all sorts of mounts, too, including ones that can fly. Not just glide, but actually fly. Beyond being able to interact with your pals, they're also able to interact with the world around them, too. Around your base, they can help you with building projects or even be assigned tasks of their own. The Palworld haters use this as ammunition to imply that Palworld is a game that's all about animal cruelty. Yes, it's true that you can treat your pals like sweatshop workers. You can kill them, cook them, and eat them, too. But the keyword there is can. Palworld has these mechanics, but you don't have to engage with them. Instead, you can treat your pals well, give them lots of attention, and make sure all their needs are tended to in return for them working hard to keep your base running. Isn't it more meaningful to be a kind trainer when you choose to be that way rather than just being funneled down that playstyle by the restrictive way the game was designed? Plus, you can do this. I don't have anything profound to say about this. I just like it. It's hard to believe that a small studio just recently founded in 2015 can accomplish things that Game Freak, backed by Nintendo, hasn't been able to do with all their funding and resources. It's very hard to believe that could be the case. Impossible, even. The only logical explanation seems to be that Game Freak could do it, they just choose not to. They choose not to change, not to grow, and not to listen to what players want from them. And if that continues, even an IP as big as Pokemon might learn there's no such thing as too big to fail. There have been other creature collector / monster taming games since Pokemon and before Palworld, but it's different this time. Palworld has opened Pandora's box. It's shown that monster taming games can do more than just exist alongside Pokemon. They can challenge and compete with it, and they won't be the last. I think we're going to start seeing more games like this, games that take aspects of Pokemon, dial it back on the repetitive formula, and add in things that players have been asking for so long now. And if Pokemon doesn't start to do the same thing, it may not see returning audiences in such numbers now that alternatives will be available. Game Freak might have been able to get away with putting out the same thing year after year after year, substituting cheap gimmicks for real innovation thus far, but now, if Pokemon doesn't start to make changes, it may find itself being left in the dust by games that it inspired in the first place. And Pokemon can change. I don't think it will, but it can. Now, I'm no game designer, but if I got the chance to make a new Pokemon game, here's what I'd do. No more mainline games for a while. Take a little break from that. No more gimmicks. Those are already dangerously close to overstaying their welcome. In this new game, have less Pokemon so they can be fleshed out and provided with numerous ways to interact and be interacted with. More importantly, no new Pokemon for a while. Even Game Freak must know the new designs are getting stale, as they've been going back to tried and true designs through regional variants. And as for world and gameplay, I'd love to see a game that comes away from the repetitive linear formula of gyms, bad guy, Elite Four, legendary Pokemon, and so on and so forth. Instead, this time make it a living, breathing world that players can explore at their leisure. Put in gyms, but make them just one option out of all kinds of different ways people can experience the Pokemon world. Add back Pokemon contests. Add other things you can do with Pokemon, like farming or construction, anything. Use some imagination. One of the coolest experiences I've ever had with Pokemon didn't even come from a Pokemon game, but instead from Minecraft. Pixelmon to be specific. It wasn't some intense battle or mystical encounter with a legendary. Nope. I was just building my house. But I did it with the help of my Pokemon. I'd ride on Staraptor to reach the higher parts of the build, I'd have Charmander light my furnace instead of having to constantly collect coal, stuff like that. And when it was all said and done, I let them all out of their Pokeballs just to roam around and enjoy the space they helped create. I'm rambling again, but I hope my points are getting across. There's more room for finding and making unique experiences in a game that's less story-driven than it is world-driven. One that's rich with small things to do and takes place in a world with many ways to interact with it, rather than the same linear route that Pokemon trainers have been walking down for almost 30 years now. Well, that's my 2 cents on the Pokemon Palworld debacle. I know that was a bit of a rant. As polarizing as it can be, I think this is a really interesting topic to discuss, so feel free to leave your thoughts on all this in the comments. Anyway, that's all from me for now. Peace.